All right, welcome to An Architectural Approach to Level Design, creating an art theory for game worlds, and so can you. I'm Chris Totten, and before we get started, I want to ask everybody to please silence cell phones, please fill out the electronic evals, and if people start needing seats, please move towards the center of your rows. So, who is this guy? I have my own indie game studio. I use this studio to publish research that I've done on games and the arts and humanities, and you're going to see that's a big theme of my work. I work with museums to showcase games. My latest thing is the Smithsonian American Art Museum Arcade, which is an indie event at Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. This year's theme is game spaces. So if you level designers who are indie have any cool games to show off with great level design, please submit. Funny how that worked out that I was speaking at level design this year. I teach game development, and I have 2 degrees in architecture. I've also published 2 books on level design. The first is An Architectural Approach to Level Design, which analyzes game worlds according to architectural theory and spatial psychology. I have also published and edited it's an edited volume called Level Design Processes and Experiences, where lovely people from the industry wrote about what they do when they design levels and let me put it into a book. So, this is not a book talk though, where I summarize the information in the book. You should still buy my book. But I'm not going to summarize it. I'm going to talk about, this is a call to action talk. This is a motivational talk that hopefully if any of you are on the fence on, I'm a level designer and I have a lot of thoughts about level design and I have a cool process, how do I share it with the world? Well, we're going to talk about it today. So, the topics are, why did I write about level design? The benefits of sharing your techniques, how to choose your topics and do level design analysis, and what I learned by sharing my own work. So first, why in the world did I write about level design? So when I was in school, I started making my own games, and this was around the time that a lot of really great books on game design were coming out, including things like Rules of Play, things that looked at game design as one would fields of classical design. And I was in architecture school learning architecture theory, seeing game designers talk about architecture theory in game design books, and I was like, they're the same, yes! And I started blending architecture theory and game design theory in my school projects, which culminated in my thesis where I turned architecture into a game and had students play the game to design their school projects. I also analyzed game worlds as pieces of architecture. So that was the beginning of a career path, understatement of the decade. So when I got out of architecture school and got into game development, I noticed that books on game design kept coming out. A lot of books on game design, and a lot of books on game design as a general field, but not really books that dove into anything else that contributed to games. So I study a lot of art. I didn't see anything that looked at the history of art and game art. Or there's more on music composition now, but that wasn't coming out for a long time. And there were very few resources on level design that weren't a chapter in a game design book that said, and sometimes they design levels too. And I thought that was weird because when I design levels, I'm not using the same skills when I design the general game mechanics versus when I work on levels. I think about things like architecture and perspective and composition, art and architecture things. And part of that's my background, but there's different sides of my brain firing. That's not true, I think that's the same side of my brain, but still, it's different ideas firing, and I thought, these are kind of separate but equal. And if I treat them as such, maybe level design has some cool things to say on its own. And I wasn't the only one saying this. I would come to GDC, I would read articles, I would listen to podcasts, and people would be talking about, this architecture thing, I bet we'd learn a lot about game design and level design if we looked at architecture. And I thought, hey, I know about that stuff. So why don't I start writing about level design and architecture? And maybe I can that's the way I can make an impact in the industry. Maybe this is my thing. So I started doing that. Okay, so that's me. Let's say you're the person that is on that fence thinking, I have something to say, I feel like I might have something to say, what do I do? So what do I talk about? I want you to ask yourselves 3 questions. 1, what do I take for granted that isn't documented anywhere? And I'm going to use the example of Blocktober, which is a recent hashtag, if you are not familiar, where level designers tweeted pictures of their gray blocked levels to the world, and a lot of people thought it was really cool because they were used to only seeing the finished product and not necessarily used to seeing what the process of making a level was. And it made a lot of light bulbs go off for people. So looking behind the curtain in this way is something that we may be very used to. Some people may even be embarrassed by their gray box levels, but it's something that people who've never seen this, students, recent new developers, or even just game players get very excited about. So, think about that stuff that is just part of your workflow that you forgot was novel. Next, semi-related, what sorts of things have you grokked or internalized so much that you forgot to learn it, that you had to learn it? I'm a teacher, and I teach software. And when I work in something like even Photoshop, when something breaks, my brain goes to this checklist that I don't even notice it goes to that solves the problem for me. I just go through this set of motions, but I forgot that I had to learn that set of motions to fix my problem. And somebody who's new, and I see this in my students, they're like, oh my gosh, it's broken, it'll never come back. And you have to teach people that thing that you forgot you had to learn, and then eventually they'll learn it. So think about those things. If there's anything you do on, again, your day-to-day process, what did you forget was new at some point? And then what other interests or knowledge do you have that you bring to your work? Are you into heavy metal music, hiking, cooking, anything? Take that and then take game or level design and then just kind of smush them together, and you'll probably have some unique perspective about which to talk about your work. So an example I like using, several years ago, I made an art history game called Laziski's Revenge, which is Yar's Revenge plus Russian propaganda art, the video game. So I made design decisions according to theories from art history and graphic design, and the way levels were arranged. Levels were supposed to each actually be a piece of graphic design art, but also an interactive level that you could, as you play, because you're moving, shapes are shifting and going, crisscrossing each other, and that would make graphic design as you play. But, I took these things that certainly have large bodies of knowledge and did game design with it. That could be art history and graphic design have whole college courses devoted to them, have whole majors, whole libraries. And if somebody were to write that book, I'm not writing that book, you can get a book out of it. So there's a lot of stuff out there in the world that you can combine with your work as a level designer and create content. So let's say you do have something like that. Let's say you're thinking, I can go do that now. Oh, crud, what do I do? How do I organize this? So I like to borrow a term, lenses, from Jesse Schell's Art of Game Design, which is an awesome book you should read. So break down your own approach into self-contained steps, and then take each of those steps and then look at your work through just that step. Don't let any other steps in. And then that's like, write everything you can about that. Okay, that's chapter 1. Now take another step, look at that one, chapter 2, or episode 2, or I don't know, episode 2, video 2, whatever. But that is how you create individual chunks, episodes, videos, etc., is you just talk about one thing in detail. If you're still looking for information, I like to go on what I call a bibliography raid. This is something I learned in grad school, where you take the thing you're inspired by, or if you have a favorite designer and they talk about their inspirations, pick up that thing, read it, or watch it, and then see if that inspirational piece talks about any of their own inspirations. Then go consume that, and then go consume that thing's inspirations. Eventually, you'll find your way looping back all the way around to the thing that you started with. But that practice, that's what researchers do, and that's how they learn as much as possible about their topic areas, is they just go find the resources that their resources used. So that's a great way to build content, citations, examples, and things like that. And then the more you do that and the more you share it, the more that everybody else in this room, for example, will be able to, everybody else will be able to pull from the knowledge base you've created. Which brings us to sharing. Now, sharing is tricky in the game industry. We have these things called NDAs. And when we were prepping for this talk, Joel had a great quote about NDA and sharing in level design, and I wanted to share it with you because it's not under NDA. I think there's a self-policing culture of fear that prevents us from sharing. It's useful to generally chip away at this culture. So here's my attempt at chipping away at this culture. I talk a lot about thinking like an architect and seeing like an architect. Today I want to talk to you about talking like an architect. So this is an image from a book called Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander. It's a book of design principles, and in it he talks about specific buildings as examples of these principles, but he starts with the principle. He starts talking about these things like the shapes of space, or humans going from dark to light, lighting conditions, things like that. And he talks about them as laws of design and laws of human behavior in space. And only after he's explained what those things are does he actually get into specific examples. And the idea would be, if you are working on something and you are thinking about design concepts as you're working on it, don't lead with I'm working on this game called X and Y, and let me tell you about this concept. Start with the concept. And what's useful about this, so you can describe concepts in generally applicable ways. You create design theories this way. And I like doing this especially when I am writing and using examples from published games, like published popular games. I always default to like action adventure games. I'm a huge fan of Zeldas and Metroids and Hyperlight Drifters and Skyrim and things like that. So I'll always default to using that as an example, but then I have to stop myself and say, can I get this to work in a racing game? Can I get this concept can I think of where it could be applied somewhere like that? And if I can't, then I should go back and rework the concept. Same thing with technology. If I'm thinking about something in terms of Unreal and I can't think of it in terms of Unity, then it's only useful to the Unreal audience and therefore invalid. Because you want to make things as useful to everybody who's a level designer as possible. So that's talking without identifying your game, without speaking about your specific game. Another thing you can do is sketch ideas without content that identifies your game. Again, I can take a concept like creating the feeling of curiosity in players with rhythmic elements and shaded lighting conditions, which this is a diagram of. And I don't have to draw a specific game. I can just draw pillars and some light and a stick figure that's going, whoo. And if you can do that, you represent, people can fill in the gaps themselves, be like, oh, I've seen games that use that. You don't have to use screenshots from your game or even games in particular. This is also a way when you're writing a book to not have to ask for permission to use screenshots. Find examples in release games. So again, use games that have already come out, either yours or ones that you play. And this is also great because it helps build us a canon of levels for people to learn from and create as great works. Like, what's the falling water of level design? Maybe we should figure that out. That's an interesting question. And then if you are going to use a screenshot or some example, and again, Joel contributed this one, use example props, make just some blocks to use in 3D, or use old props from old games that you've already published, and that way you don't have to, again, use that NDA protected stuff. Long story short, more sharing equals design history equals more knowledge. I love this book cover because it illustrates this idea very, very succinctly. This Georgian-style building probably wouldn't exist if people didn't understand Greek architecture. And if we just wiped all of the Greek temples off the map, then we wouldn't have all these architecture styles that were inspired by them. Same thing with your levels. If we don't talk about your levels and we don't celebrate your levels, which are great art themselves, then they're gone. So we should talk about them. So lastly, what have I personally learned by writing about level design? The first and perhaps most important is, who am I to write a book? I do not work at a AAA studio. I've never worked at a AAA studio. I am not indie famous, but I am the person who chose to open a Word document one day. And that matters. So sometimes you're just the person who dares to take this task on. And I've found that people that I am fans of come up to me and now say, oh my gosh, I'm a huge fan of your book. And I'll be like, oh my God, you made that game I love. And that's really cool. You know, all the people that I thought should probably be doing this instead like my work now. So, well, maybe not all, but some that I've talked to. And that's really cool. So don't be afraid to try. You know, never be afraid to start and try. And that goes for anything in the game industry. You know, do the thing, and people will eventually recognize you for it. I also learned the publishing process, which I'm not going to read this whole thing because I only have a few minutes left. But in summary, you submit your idea to an editor who's in charge of finding new books. They're called acquisitions editors. Then you work with them to develop an outline that provides something different from what's already on the market. So again, that goes back to the idea of filling in knowledge gaps. If you are contributing something that's never been contributed before, the publisher will get really excited. So then once you've established this and usually gone through a round of peer review, so submitting to people in the industry that look at your proposal and say, yeah, that's a thing that should exist. You write your manuscript, give it to the editors, and they help you arrange your content, check it for grammar, make it sound better than it did when it just came out of your fingers, when you were perhaps a little too tired to type. But it's put into a final layout, printed, and then book. I also learned how to best choose the release method for content. I'm talking a lot about books and publishing, but I've talked with a lot of people that have said, no, I want my stuff to be available for free. I go with what I go with because as an academic, I get credit in my day job for publishing with presses. That's just part of the academic thing. But if you are weighing which one to go with, here's a breakdown. Publishers are great. They do a lot of things for you, but your work becomes part of their business model. They sell it. They may even own your manuscript. I've had friends who want to get their manuscript republished, but the publisher doesn't want to do it, so they had to buy their manuscript back. So be aware of that. It's really not that big a deal day to day, but be aware of it. Putting it out on the internet for free lets you reach lots of people, regardless of their ability to pay for content, and that's really important. diversity and economic diversity is really important, and I really respect the people who do choose to put stuff out for free, to help people, to help content reach people. The downside of this, though, is that it lacks a system of checks and balances to help every bit of proving that you are the person who should be talking about this, editing your content, making it sound good is something you have to take on your own, and you also have to do your own marketing. Publishers do marketing for you. So both have their ups and downs, and those are things to think about. And then lastly, and another important thing is making a famous game is not the only way to make a positive impact on the industry. It's worth saying that sharing content, teaching people, and helping create a system of theory and knowledge that other people can pull from and hopefully make even better games and levels is a worthwhile pursuit, and I think we should celebrate it more. So I've learned a lot by sharing my work, but I'm giving this talk because I don't think that I should or can do this alone. Again, I want this to be as varied and diverse as all those game design books that are up in the bookstore. And there are lots of experiences in game development. Mine are not the only ones out there, and they can all impact how we make game levels. So I'm issuing a call to action. Take what you're doing and use it to tell the world about level design. Help us build a library of level design knowledge and make it knowledge that can be shared by people, can be talked about and discussed. And so that we can make better and more diverse game spaces that rival the most beautiful houses, most iconic skyscrapers, and the most sublime cathedrals. And I have a few minutes for questions, but thank you for coming to my talk. Questions? Yeah, there's 2 mics up here if anybody has a question. Going. All right.
Hi, I'm currently a student at DigiPen in Seattle, and I've been working a lot with a colleague of mine, just trying to learn more about level design in a way that isn't really taught at our school. And we've had a really hard time as far as finding levels, like a collection of levels for any sort of concept. Is there some sort of database or like some sort of collection of, these are good examples of these kinds of levels?
Yeah, so the question was, is there a database of levels to look at? Not that I'm aware of. We had an interesting conversation before this. There was a preview article posted about this workshop that one of the questions was similar to yours. I would start there. Okay. There were some great citations, but that could be a project, actually. That sounds like a good idea, history of level design. So
we'll talk.
Maybe, yeah, that'd be a good idea.
Hi, my name's Deepak. I teach design at Roblox, and a lot of them are user-generated content, so a lot of them don't have that background. So I find this very fascinating. So besides level design, what else do you feel like a lot of designers aren't, bringing in when they come into making games?
So what are designers not bringing in when they make games? I've talked a lot about art history in this, but a lot of, with my expertise, it goes back to art history. And I do see that in game development. For example, I'm making a Don Quixote card game right now. It's essentially an intellectual property that's just been sitting there because it's a novel from 1605, right? And I know that because I read literature. And if something like that surprises me, you don't see more of people just taking a great classic book and being like, let me make a game out of this because I can. And then you're also working on a franchise, in that way. So just those cultural milestones beyond game development, I think I'd like to see more of in the game industry. I listened to a podcast interviewing Tim Schafer, and he said one of the best things he ever did was take a folklore class and have in college, and that rich outer life helped him go back to games and then make things like Grim Fandango, which is based on Mexican folklore. So like I said, any interest that you have, if you can find a way to get it to work with game development, I would absolutely say do more of it. Yeah.
I guess since no one else is asking,
yeah.
What's your biggest gripe with level design today?
My biggest gripe with level design today. Wow. I guess like over linearity would be my gripe. And there are games where it's like, yes, this should be linear, but I love Doom 2016, and I love that I was playing a first-person shooter that I can just run around in a big loop and have something chase me, and then turn around and shoot at it, and then run away in another loop, and that was really cool. I felt like I played so many games that were just long hallways and then longer hallways. And I don't know, that felt really good to see a level that was laid out like that again after, not seeing it since really like the 90s. So yeah.
Hi, I'm an autodidact, and I end up reading a lot of books. I love that little slideshow. I was like, yes, got that one, got that one, got that one. But one thing I really, really love is being able to have situations like this where we get to talk to a teacher and converse a little bit more. So for level designers, what is a introductory course, or what is a kind of course that we could find at a local college that you would suggest relating to architecture and thinking more in this direction?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So courses that you can find that I would recommend for level designers. If you took an architectural theory course, and it is one where they talk about not just identifying the buildings and using them as references, because a lot of people think architecture and game design, they think about environment art and making things look like classic architecture. But if they're talking about architectural design concepts in that course, which a lot of things will do. They talk about why the building was important. It's usually something experiential. Then that would be a really good point. If you're not thinking of taking a course or can't take a course, then I really like the book Chambers for a Memory Palace by Lyndon and Moore, Lyndon and Moore. And that is it's basically two old architects comparing notes about experiences of buildings they saw. And it's really cool, and it's funny because they actually take a little jab at video games in the beginning, and I'm like, I'm citing it, like you're a great book for level designers, so ha. And yeah, so that's a book that I tell a lot of people, it's actually a pretty good read, so if you're not able to take a class, maybe buy that book. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe I'll mention a few podcasts I like too. I've listened to a lot of Checkpoints. They do cool things with design concepts. Level Design Lobby has been really helpful, and I listen a lot to Retronauts, and I know they've been around forever, but they've been doing a series on Metroidvania design, which has been fantastic. So again, those are free, and if you go listen to those, there's some good stuff there. So if that's it, then be sure to come back after the break for the holy grail of multiplayer level design, maps for casual and competitive play, which will be really cool. So thank you for coming out and listening to the talk.